Well, I am very happy to be here today to participate, especially on such a nice week in Washington. Just a little bit of background. I worked for Dow for about 22 years, starting in manufacturing, but mostly in various roles across the supply chain. And in my current role, which is global responsibility for sustainability and compliance for supply chain, it's really a pretty broad umbrella that includes things like transportation safety and security, trade compliance, dangerous goods and HS classifications, and then other kind of broad sustainability initiatives that we have within the company. And hopefully many of you are at least a little bit familiar with Dow. We're a really large integrated global chemical company. We have about 56,000 employees. We make about 7,000 different product lines that ship to, I think, 175 different countries around the world. So it's about $48, $49 billion in sales per year. And I guess I really should say that in past tense because last month we actually merged with DuPont, and so we're officially now the Dow DuPont company. So all of those things that I just mentioned have actually, those numbers have significantly increased here recently. But from a Dow perspective, we operate a large, very integrated global supply chain with about 45,000 customer locations that we service every year. And a lot of that manufacturing capacity and capability is here in the U.S. So for us, we export about 10 times more material from the U.S. Than we import. So we really, for Dow specifically, definitely don't have a trade deficit. But looking kind of beyond Dow and more to the overall industry, and with some information from ACC, the American Chemistry Council, our industry is really kind of the building blocks for so many things. And I think 95% of manufactured goods are actually come in contact with chemical manufacturing in some way or another. And this could be textiles or electronics or automotive and a lot of different markets. So we're a large, important trading sector, and I think about 14% of the U.S. exports, so a nice little chunk. And from a jobs perspective, it's estimated that about 810,000 jobs in the U.S. are connected with the business of chemistry, and about 30% of those are highly dependent on that export demand. So our industry really does have a kind of a multiplier effect on job creation and economic growth. And since NAFTA began, trade in chemicals between the respective NAFTA countries has actually tripled. So it was about $20 billion back in 1994, and now it's closer to 63. And so I know I'm throwing out a lot of numbers and statistics, but hopefully just trying to kind of paint a picture of the chemical industry and Dow. And another kind of specific example, when I first hired into the company, I was in manufacturing and I was an engineer in the polyglycols plant. And in that particular plant, polyglycols are used for all sorts of things, right? So they go into home and personal care type of items that you use every day, and paints and coatings. And so to make polyglycol, you start with like ethylene, and our ethylene is all NAFTA certified. That's moved into a production facility where it's transformed into ethylene oxide, which is also NAFTA certified. That's then shipped over to the plant that I actually worked in, where it's reacted with other materials that come in, and then those polyglycols are NAFTA certified as well. And then they're put into drums and into trucks and to rail cars. They're shipped out to all of our customers within the U.S., but then they're also shipped out to Canada and Mexico. So, that's just kind of one very simple example of a chemical supply chain, but I could give you thousands more. But hopefully that kind of helps you understand, it is, NAFTA's, for Dow, NAFTA is very important to us. It's very important to our customers. We want to see it continue. But we also, definitely welcome the opportunity to modernize it. I've been in this whole trade compliance space directly just for about 6 months now, and I can tell you that it is a significant effort. And for Dow, it's actually a dedicated team to help, manage the program and ensure compliance and work through kind of the flow of trade. So I guess here in my last just couple of minutes, I thought I would bring up just a few opportunities for modernization that we think are important to supply chain. First off, I think may have been mentioned a bit, the original agreement obviously was negotiated back, before the commercialization of the internet. And so, we clearly think that anything that would better facilitate digital trade would be a good thing. And this could be things like strong protection for cross-border data flows, and just the use of things like electronic signatures, and cut down on some of the manual processes. We hope that customs procedures can be updated and become more efficient. And we would also welcome the simplification of more efficiency with things like rules of origin, which for the chemical industry can be pretty complex. And then also like modernizing transport security requirements and aligning domestic infrastructure projects with trade priorities. So I guess in closing, I'll just say I am not a deep expert on all of the elements of NAFTA. But over the last 6 months, since I have been more engaged, I definitely have a better appreciation of just how beneficial it is to a company like Dow that is primarily a U.S.-based manufacturer. So we definitely want to see it continue and to be able to have that flow of free trade. And but it can be complex and cumbersome, and we would welcome efforts to modernize it as well. So thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm particularly delighted to be here for 2 reasons. The first one is that I saved this from being an all-female panel, and we all know that happens far too often in the world. Second, I want a photograph of this just so I can say I was on an almost all-female panel, okay? The second reason is that these are dark days, my friends. I mean, you are in a trade association here. This is near apocalyptic that we're looking at, and I don't mean to exaggerate. I'm not one for hyperbole. I actually am terrified of what's about to happen. And not for me. Everybody in this room is going to be absolutely fine. I'm worried about the poor guy who was on that slide who had the kidney transplant. I mean, that's the guy that I worry about. I'm worried about all the hundreds of thousands of people who could lose their jobs if NAFTA actually is terminated. Do you remember the heady days of 2015 when we talked about how TPP was going to be the other way of modernizing NAFTA, and then we got the TPP signed, but we were all worried about whether it was going to be ratified or not, and we were looking at Congress and not sure they have the votes, this, that, and the other, and Hillary came out and said she wasn't actually in favor of TPP. We were like, okay, fine. So this could be an opportunity for us to modernize NAFTA. And then November of last year happened, and a lot of us sat there, and some of us were, like me, were kind of, I'm determined to be optimistic. A renegotiation of NAFTA is a huge opportunity for us. Let's face it, the treaty was negotiated more than 20 years ago. It needs to be updated. There were no smartphones, there was no internet economy back in those days. Let's incorporate all of that and make it better. And we thought maybe this administration is actually aiming to do that. And now we've got to the point where it's abundantly clear what the strategy is. The strategy appears to be that they will put on the table issues that they know Mexico and Canada cannot accept. So ideally, Mexico or Canada walk away from the table, or the negotiations drag on and on and on, and somebody at the top says, you know what, I'm losing patience with this, and I'm pulling it out. I am more worried about the future of North America than I have been in a long time. This is a complete reversal from where I was 2 years ago, where I was convinced, look, North America is the most productive, competitive region in the world, and we've got a lot to be grateful for. Now, if we look at the first of these slides I'm going to put up here, it's just basic information about NAFTA. You don't need to read it. But I would say there's one part here. Among the biggest beneficiaries of commerce are America's small and medium-sized enterprises, 125,000 of which sell their goods and services to Mexico and Canada. We focus a lot, with good cause, on the big corporations. But it's SMEs who are beginning to actually find a way to take advantage of NAFTA because of e-commerce. Think of the Etsy's that are out there, or the Amazon marketplaces. But I'll tell you what just happened in Mexico. Because of the pessimism over the future of NAFTA, President Peña Nieto went to China, he sat down with Jack Ma of Alibaba, and he signed a deal so that Alibaba has agreed to train Mexican SMEs on how to use Alibaba's systems and payment systems, giving Mexican producers access to 450 million consumers. That's something which shows that not only is Mexico looking out there into the world for alternatives, and we can come back to that a little bit later on, but also that, we have fallen behind terribly. We're not even close to getting to those kind of realities. So the supply chains in NAFTA, I think, are of critical importance. We've talked about the auto industry. Up here it says it's essentially a $10 billion tax cut for the auto industry having the supply chains of NAFTA, and we stand to lose those. Now, let me just say one more thing about China, because one of the extraordinary things about Caroline's slide about the decline in manufacturing and automobile employment, it all began to happen around 1999, 2000. That was where the big slip began, right? And I'm not saying it's causality. It may be coincidence, but of course Chinese accession to the WTO has to have something to do with that. So let's imagine that we're in an after-NAFTA scenario. I'm sorry, I'm taking you to a dark future. Okay? What are the average tariff levels? You probably are fully aware of these by now. Mexico, under WTO tariffs, has an average tariff level of 7.1%. The United States 3.5%, Canada 4.2%, and the auto sector is 2.5% for the United States. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, if you were Wilbur Ross or Robert Lighthizer and you're looking at this scenario, you're saying, all right, so under NAFTA we have 0% tariffs and we're not doing very well. After NAFTA, Mexico has a higher tariff level than we do, so what are our exports going to do? Exports are not going to be particularly competitive. And if you move over to the next part of the slide, you'll see here that, of course, tariffs on agricultural goods, which was referenced earlier on, are particularly costly. And the one that stands out for me is the 75% tariff on chicken and potatoes. Now, I don't care about that just because I love chicken and potatoes. In fact, I had them for dinner last night. But it's because Mexico, and you may not know this, is a huge poultry consumer of US poultry. And they don't just bring in full chickens, they eat the dark meat. Up in the United States, we like to eat the white meat. Mexicans love the dark meat. This is an outlet for US poultry producers. They can sell their breast meat here in the United States, legs and thighs in Mexico. With a 75% tariff on US poultry coming into Mexico, I'm going to be investing in Mexican poultry farms. Because that to me is a sure bet. Someone's going to replace. There's no way that your average Mexican consumer is going to pay 75% more for the chicken that they're buying in the store. They're all of a sudden going to say, you know what, there's got to be a cheaper source. And somebody will set up Mexican chicken farms. So we're looking at the impact on the agricultural sector there. Somebody this morning at an event I was at made a very good point. He said they're now selling tractors here in the United States that have screens on them. So that you as a farmer, when you're out in the field, you can watch the price of your commodities going up and down. Imagine the day after NAFTA termination is announced, and you're a farmer in Iowa, Nebraska, wherever, and you're looking at your corn exports, your chicken exports, just plummeting in price. What's the political impact going to be of that? So I have to say that I really enjoyed Lance's presentation earlier on, but I kind of have to question whether or not the administration has fully thought this through. And if they have, then there's something else that's going to happen afterwards. This is just the beginning of the story, isn't it? Surely the bigger plan is, let's go to the WTO and start to throw our weight around there. Because WTO tariffs don't help us. I see a longer plan that's being designed, and the longer, bigger plan is an attack on global trade institutions. And I think Secretary Ross has said as much. When he wrote an article a few weeks ago about how he defines reciprocity in trade, he said it's not about you reduce your tariffs by 50% and I'll reduce my tariffs by 50%. He said it's about both of us getting down to the same tariff level. That's what he wants, and that's what he wants to see in the WTO. There's a great paper, if you haven't seen this already, on the question of supply chains, Reversing NAFTA, a Supply Chain Perspective. And I think the key element there that I'll just highlight to you is this. The losses in low-skilled employment are most significant, with employment declining by 256,000 in the US, 125,000 in Canada, and 951,000 in Mexico. Let me just tell you, as somebody who studies Mexico and Mexican demographics and migration, it's not a good thing that 951,000 Mexicans are going to be looking for a job. That's going to be, we're all of a sudden going to see an upward tick in Mexican migration for the first time in years and years and years. We're in net negative migration from Mexico at this point in time. All of a sudden, you're going to have close to 1 million Mexicans looking for work. This is a very boring chart that you do not need to look at. Bottom left is the key one. There's your 256,000 jobs that are going to be disappearing in the United States. A couple of things here about the importance of NAFTA, and I think this is basically an echo of the slide that Carolyn has shown there, but it does show the importance of intermediate goods in the NAFTA relationship on the right there. Lastly, look at this map of the United States and how different regions of the United States actually depend upon the supply chain in very different ways. And of course, our friends down in Texas are highly dependent upon those imports of intermediate goods and exports of intermediate goods. The energy trade is something that I don't actually have time to talk about, but if you think about energy as an intermediate good as part of the production process, this is critical. The United States has done extremely well in recent years. They've essentially reversed the trade balance in energy with Mexico. Mexico used to have a huge trade surplus with the United States because they exported a lot of crude oil at high prices. They're now exporting a lot less crude oil at low prices to the United States and importing a lot of refined products and US natural gas. The United States currently exports more than $20 billion in energy products to Mexico and imports only $8.7 billion. And that surplus on the part of the United States is projected to grow significantly as Mexico imports more and more refined products. So my last slide is this, and I do mean to end on a depressing note. Mr. Lighthizer was interviewed on Tuesday, and he was asked, well, do you have a sort of another plan? And I think he said, look, the USTR has not done any analysis on what the end of NAFTA would mean for the United States. That doesn't make me feel very good when I go to bed at night. I mean, if they were taking these decisions based upon years and years of studies and saying, you know what, we think that we'll be absolutely fine because the stats show it, I could say, okay, fine, I get it. I maybe disagree with it because I like Mexico, but for the United States, I get it. You've got to be in charge, you've got to be responsible for your own people. And then at the bottom of this, it says, do you have a backup plan? No, we don't really have a plan beyond trying to get a good agreement. If we end up not having an agreement, my guess is all three countries will do just fine. Now that worries me. I don't think that the day after NAFTA the world falls apart, but look at what's happening with Brexit. Brexit is the comparison we should be looking to at this point in time. After Brexit, markets rallied and everybody said it's going to be fine. What's happening now? Companies are leaving the United Kingdom, people are deciding not to invest there, and the economy is going into steady decline. The next stage of that is you start looking for scapegoats, because that's already happened in the UK. They're not blaming the people who made the decision to leave Europe, they're blaming the people who are making it difficult to leave Europe. So if you oppose Brexit, you're the one who is responsible for economic hard times. Let's come back here in 4 years' time and see who the scapegoats are.